Your heart has beat continuously for your entire life, from that very first heartbeat back when you were a fetus developing in the uterus until this very day. That constant rhythm that keeps the blood pumping through your arteries is thanks to a small mass of cardiac tissue called the sinoatrial node, along with a complex cardiac conduction system that runs through your heart, coordinating your heartbeat. In this video, we're going to build out the cardiac conduction system piece by piece, learn how it all works, and then use that to understand the different parts of an ECG or EKG. And throughout the video, we'll look at real human cadavers and other cadaveric images provided by Anatomage, the creator of the world's first virtual dissection table. So you can see how all of these structures are arranged three-dimensionally in the body. And by the end of this video, you're going to know this whole process by heart. Well, by brain, because that's where memories are stored, but you know what I mean. Let's jump to the whiteboard and get started. So let's start by drawing out the heart. Here we have an outline of the main structure of the heart on the cardiac muscle. We've got the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the left atrium and the left ventricle. And of course we have the right side in blue because it's low oxygen blood, the left side in red because it's high oxygen blood that's just come from the lungs. And remember, our blood is always red, never blue. That's just the colors we use in the diagrams. Blood is going to come into the right side through the superior and inferior vena cavas into the right atrium. It'll pass through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle is going to pump it out through the pulmonary artery to go to the lungs to receive some oxygen. The blood is going to get back to the heart through the pulmonary veins and go into the left atrium. From the left atrium, it'll pass through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle is going to pump it very forcefully out through the aorta so it can travel throughout the rest of the body and deliver the oxygen and nutrients and hormones and all the other stuff that's in our blood. In between the left side and the right side of the heart, we have the septum that really divides the heart into those two halves. And here we can see in the Anatomage models, the right atrium and the right ventricle sitting sort of anterior to the left side, where we have the left atrium and the left ventricle. Now for the rest of the video, I'm going to assume you know those structures pretty well, but if you want a refresher, a whole lesson on all of that, check out my Pathway of Blood Through the Heart video. Links down below for that. Now in the heart, there's three different types of tissue that we're concerned about in this video. First, we have the cardiac conduction system itself. That's going to be in yellow on this diagram, and that's non-contractile cardiac tissue. In other words, these aren't muscle cells that are contracting. They're going to be more like nervous tissue that's going to be conducting signals throughout the heart. Second, we have the cardiac muscle tissue. This is going to be contractile tissue. It's going to be tissue that contracts and pumps blood, but it also conducts signals as well. The cardiac conduction system, which is just about 1% of the total kind of cells in here, that's going to conduct these signals very quickly, whereas the cardiac muscle, it'll take a little bit longer for the signals to pass through the muscle tissue itself. And the cardiac muscle tissue, that's going to be the vast majority of tissue in the heart. Now there is some non-conductive tissue in the heart, and that's going to be the fibrous tissue, and that's going to run from the atrial floor between the atrium and the ventricles. Now the fact that this fibrous tissue right there is non-conductive is very important. We don't want the atria and the ventricles to be contracting at the same time. We want the atria to contract and push the blood into the ventricles, and then the ventricles to contract and push all that blood out of the heart. If this tissue right here was conductive, then we would have the atria and ventricles contracting at the same time. Wouldn't be good. And the only way that signal can pass through here is through the cardiac conduction system, through this yellow section right there. That's the only part where the signal travels through that fibrous connective tissue. So that fibrous connective tissue separates the atria from the ventricles into two sections that we call the atrial syncytium as well as the ventricular syncytium. A syncytium is just a big, sort of hard to pronounce word that means a group of cells that are all electrically connected to each other. So all of the cardiac muscle in this atrial syncytium are connected electrically, meaning that if one of the cells depolarizes, it depolarizes the next cardiac muscle cell, and that depolarizes the next one. And eventually they'll all be depolarized because they're all electrically connected. Same thing in the ventricular syncytium. When one of those cells depolarizes, that'll depolarize the next cell and the next cell and the next cell until it's all depolarized. Now the signal passing between cardiac muscle cells is sort of slow. I kind of mentioned that earlier, and that's why we need this cardiac conduction system to conduct those signals very quickly so that the atria can contract as one unit and the ventricles especially can contract as one unit. But again, the atrial syncytium will depolarize first, contracting the atria, and then the ventricular syncytium will depolarize, contracting the ventricles. Now let's take a look at the individual parts of the cardiac conduction system. First here we have the sinoatrial node. Now the sinoatrial node is autorhythmic, meaning that it's going to be sending pulses by itself even without input from some other source. Autorhythmic meaning self-rhythmic. In other words, that SA node is the pacemaker of the heart. It sends a signal every time our heart beats. Now there will be input from the brain, from the cardiac regions of the brain. They'll be sending signals to the heart to speed up that SA node or to slow down that SA node. But even without input from the brain, the SA node is going to be sending signals itself, causing our heartbeat rhythm. This consistent rhythm happens by increasing permeability in the SA node of sodium ions and calcium ions. So those sodium and calcium ions are slowly entering into the SA node, and it prevents potassium from leaving the cells in the SA node. So there's a slow buildup of positive charge over time as sodium and calcium come into the SA node, and then as soon as it reaches a threshold membrane potential, the SA node will send an action potential. Now the signals will eventually get to another node called the atrioventricular, or AV node. More on that in just a moment. But next, let's talk about the internodal pathway. This is going to be how the signal transmits from the SA node to the AV node. And if you look at that internodal pathway, there's 3 branches of it, and they're all passing through the right atrium. Now on my diagram, they look sort of planar or flat with each other, but if we look on the anatomage images, we'll see that these are actually 3-dimensional, running through that right atrium, which we can see right there. So the SA node depolarizes, sends a signal through the internodal pathway to the AV node, and that's going to depolarize the right atrium. Now eventually that depolarization would make itself over to the left atrium, but that's going to take a long time without the interatrial pathway, which is going to run from the SA node over into the left atrium. That interatrial pathway will conduct the signal very quickly into the left atrium and depolarize it. Most of the diagrams that I looked up have the interatrial pathway coming directly from the SA node. But one thing I noticed in the anatomage images is that the interatrial pathway is actually branching off of one of the internodal branches, even though most of the diagrams you look up on this show it coming from the SA node directly. Great, so the signal comes from the SA node. It's going to travel through the interatrial pathway as well as the internodal pathway, depolarizing both atria so that they can contract. That signal then is going to make it to the AV node. Now we've talked about the cardiac conduction system needing to send these signals very quickly, but the AV node sort of does the opposite. There's going to be a delay in the AV node. Now what would be the benefit of that? Well, like I said earlier, we want the atria to contract before the ventricles contract. So that delay is going to really separate the atrial contraction from the ventricular contraction. That way we can get all of the blood from the atria to the ventricles, and then the ventricles can pump it all out. From the AV node, the signal is going to pass into the bundle of His, also known as the atrioventricular bundle. That bundle is immediately going to separate into the right and left bundle branches. Now, unlike the AV node, which passes the signal very slowly, the bundle of His and the bundle branches are going to transmit that signal very quickly down the septum of the heart. Also, as the signal is traveling through the septum, it's not going to be stimulating the ventricles to contract just yet. The ventricles will be stimulated to contract when the signal is passing its way back up. That's going to allow the pumping to happen from the apex of the heart on the way back up to kind of force the blood out through the pulmonary artery and the aorta this way. The tricuspid and mitral valves will also snap shut during this time to prevent the blood from backflowing into the atria. Now, extending out of the left and right bundle branches, we have something called the Purkinje fibers. And the Purkinje fibers are going to take that signal traveling through the bundle branches and spread it out throughout the muscle of the right and left ventricles. That's going to conduct that signal many, many times faster than if we were only relying on the ventricular syncytium, or the connections between all of the cardiac cells. So quick recap of all of that. The SA node, or the pacemaker of the heart, will send out a signal that'll pass through the interatrial pathway to stimulate the left atrium. It'll also pass through the internodal pathways to stimulate the right atrium. The signal will make it to the AV node, where it's going to pass very slowly to cause a delay before the ventricles will contract. The signal will pass through the bundle of His and the left and right bundle branches. On the way back up, they'll pass through the Purkinje fibers. That's going to stimulate the cardiac muscle and the ventricles to contract and pump the blood out through the pulmonary artery as well as the aorta. Now let's take a look at an ECG or an EKG. This is the thing that you've seen in like doctor movies and stuff, where you see the beep, beep, and if it stops, you hear it go beep, because the heart has stopped beating. But it's a measure of the electrical activity happening in the heart. And it's got 3 regions here. It's got the P wave, the QRS complex, as well as the T wave. And these 3 sections correspond to different things happening in the cardiac conduction pathway. So again, we have the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. And you can see that happening one more time there. I just really like that animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect this to the cardiac conduction pathway, looking at the P wave, QRS complex, and the T wave. We're going to start with the P wave. The P wave is going to correspond to the depolarization of the atria. So we've got the depolarization happening, and you can see those signals traveling through those different pathways, causing depolarization of the atria. So that's the main thing happening here in the P wave. The atria will depolarize. Next, we have what we call the PR interval. The PR interval is going to start at the beginning of the P wave and last all the way really until the Q part right here. We call it the PR interval, I think, because sometimes on ECGs the Q wave might be hard to identify or might not show up. So we refer to this as the PR interval. You also might see something called the PR segment. So just as a quick clarification, the PR interval starts at the beginning of P and lasts until R, whereas the PR segment is just from the end of P to the beginning of R. So PR interval would be this, PR segment would just be this. Now during the PR interval, the atria are going to contract, and that's going to send blood from the right atrium into the ventricle and the blood from the left atrium into the left ventricle. Basically, any blood that was still left in the atrium